To comprehend the concept of postcolonialism, we must understand colonialism. The basic definition for colonialism is defined as taking over and occupying foreign territory. Colonialism began in the 15th century and carried on through the 1960s and is mostly prominent in territories part of Latin America and the African continent. Most of colonialism is divided between native and those with European descent. The powerful European countries exploit foreign underprivileged nations and colonize for resources to overpower the native culture. The dominance of the Western countries transformed the native lands through ideology, culture, language, and religion. So what happens when colonialism ends? The repercussion of colonialism carries on to the idea of postcolonialism. Postcolonialism derives off the political, social, and theoretical struggles of the territories that have been colonized. These struggles translate to rethinking and rebuilding the territories that have been colonized. The concept of postcolonialism brings an issue of the placement of power and Reconstruction. According to the writer Iveson, in the postcolonialism era, there is the persistence of empire in human history and the resistance to it. The resistance to empires brings war and violence, and to form a society from abrasive brutality is impractical. Therefore, the problem is the colonizer and their interference with the colonized society. The post-colonized countries in our society have been heavily influenced by large powers, but within the government in these societies, there's a lack of order and structure. The dependence of the colonized countries to the European colonizer institute a state of deconstruction or disaster. Simultaneously, the desire for autonomy or anti-colonialist becomes difficult to institutionalize democracy due to corruption and disunion. Therefore, the lack of control and administration creates corruption and discrepancy within the society. The development of the country, or more specifically, city or civilization, lacks the discipline and jurisdiction. The post-colonial sites are in despair due to the patronizing rulers that have conquered them. Yet a challenge arises on how to function once the post-colonized countries have reached autonomy. There is an aspiration for a utopia, but with the lack of resources, it is not obtainable.
The psychiatrist and philosopher Franz Omar Fanon explores the theory of post-colonialism. He was intrigued by the psychology of colonialization because of his experience in Algeria. Algeria was ruled by various Arab dynasties from the 8th through the 16th century, when it became part of the Ottoman Empire. The decline of the Ottomans was followed by a brief period of independence that ended when France launched a war of conquest in 1830. By 1847, the French had largely suppressed Algerian residents to the invasion, and the following year made Algeria a department of France. French colonists modernized Algeria's agricultural and commercial economy, but lived apart from the Algerian majority, enjoying social and economic privileges extended to few non-Europeans. Ethnic resentment, fueled by revolutionary politics introduced by Algerians who had lived and studied in France, led to a widespread nationalist movement in the mid-20th century. A war of independence ensued, and Algeria became independent from the French rule. During the time of war, Franz Fanon moved to Algeria. He was chief of the staff for a year once the Algerian War for Independence erupted. He worked with patients of the French army who carried out torture, put down the anti-colonial battle. He resigned from his position because he could not be politically loyal to the French due to the anti-colonial movement. However, he decided to stay in Algeria and train nurses for the FLN movement. Negotiations ended the conflict and led to Algerian independence, and most Europeans left the country, but the French left a lasting impact on the Algerian culture. Fanon writes about his personal experiences and struggles that he faced due to the French colonial rule in Algeria. Fanon believed that colonialism was destructive. In his writing, he investigated and discovered how both colonizers and colonized were impacted by imperialism, and how the colonized would not only have to get rid of the colonizers physically, but culturally as well. Fanon even went to the extent of defending anti-imperialist violence, because for him violence became a valid means of counteracting imperial oppression. From the witnessed in Algerians, Fanon decided to create the post-colonial theory, which stated that the concept of post-colonialism is a critical discourse that seeks to interrogate the power relations, form of representation, and injustices of colonialism. According to Fanon, the colonial war is a compartmentalized world racially divided between the European towns and native towns, colonizers and colonized. The religion, language, and overall societies were transfixed by colonists. In his written works, Fanon emphasized the complexity between two emerging cultures. The general black culture of Algerians was dictated by the white European culture of France. For Fanon, the French and colonizers became inhuman. The theory of post-colonialism is highlighted in Algeria by the merging of two distinct cultures in a destructive relationship.
Le Corbusier designed several buildings around the globe, including India, North and South America, and Europe. He was interested in city planning and reforming it for the better. Under the French rule of Algeria, Le Corbusier was hired to design a city plan that derived from the design of the French government and Henry Post. Le Corbusier dismissed the idea because he wanted for Algiers to become an international city. He wanted to make an innovative and bold plan that would capture the attention of all. Since colonization had ended, Algiers was meant to be the capital and paradise of the continent Africa. Therefore, Plan Obis was designed based on the three concepts: a commercial site for the Cape of Algiers, a residential area, and a road town. The concept of the road town consisted of elevated highways connecting between suburban cities and residential levels. The problem was that Plan Obis never came into construction, due to the cost and the extravagant design. In 1942, Le Corbusier ended his plans for Algiers, and during the Algerian War for Independence, the French decided to enter a new plan for Algiers called Plan de Constantine. Ironically, the French used some design aspects of Le Corbusier's plan. By 1962, Nigeria obtained independence and the French had fled Algiers. The failure of Plan Obis demonstrated the failure of reconstructing a post-colonial site. The lack of resources due to colonization gave Algiers a disadvantage to rebuild and make progress for the territory.
Brasilia consists of 5,771 square kilometers and was founded on April 21, 1960 as the new national capital of the newly industrialized Brazil. The idea of moving Brazil's capital from the coast to the center inhabited interior has been a dream of numerous visionaries since the middle of the 18th century, and part of President Juscelino Kubitschek's National Modernization Project. Before construction of the new capital, the area resembled a desert with no people, scarce water, few animals, and plants. As one travels across the central plateau of Brazil, they leave behind familiar Brazil and step into this modern city. The city brings together grand administration centers and public spaces with the ideals of urban living as promoted through Le Corbusier in 6-story housing blocks with pylon supports that allow the landscape to flow around and underneath them. In this sense, Brasilia was seen as a utopian experience in urban modernization. The main focus of the creation of this new capital was to transform Brazilian society and use this as a platform to propel the rest of the nation towards these values. The anthropologist James Huston critically examined the failure of Brasilia. For Huston, the grandiosity of this project was associated with an ambitious development strategy, but the aspirations for the city are not met. Under Kubitschek, the designers Lucio Costa and Oscar Niemeyer wanted to not only reconstruct the city, but reconstruct the social and cultural aspects of it. Their plan consisted of dividing the city into different zones called superquadras, or large residential blocks, and have blocks raised on pilot or structural piers that would encompass the perfect social coexistence of the city. This was called the pilot plan of Brasilia. Huston argued that by dividing the zones, it destroyed the planners' utopian visions of being united. Additionally, the increasing amounts of social discrimination gives an advantage to some of the residents of the superquadras and a disadvantage for others. The idea for the planners was an equal living standard for all, but the people who inhabit the buildings were forced to adopt the new forms of social experience. The designers had key functions to organize the city, concentrate on commercializing and institute residential areas. As Huston phrases it, we must determine whether the proposals are the right instruments to bring about the desired ends, or if the intentions of the designer are very different from the ones imagined. Postcolonialism was an era of many changes and new proposals. It's simply the mental and physical struggles faced by the people of the colonized country. The countries colonized are unable to function on their own because the colonized are drastically dependent on the colonizer in terms of functioning and ruling, and so when the countries reach full autonomy, things are not stable. We see this in Plan Obis, Algeria, where the government tries to rebuild and reconstruct an area, but it fails due to the segregation and diversity between cultures and social classes. Therefore, self-governing becomes a challenge when the government fails to accomplish the plans of the prospect of utopia. The theory of colonialism sums it up precisely. Postcolonialism is a connection between the forms of power, representation, and injustices in colonialism.